So, as promised, I've come to Waverley Station just to remind you of some of the sights and sounds of the place. I've taken lots of photographs, which I'm going to put on some sheets to add to the email, that you can combine, that you can use to create your own settings for the figures that you may well have drawn either last Friday from the session we had with Emmy and Sunny, or perhaps you'll have a look at that later or find your own figures. So looking straight across here, I mean the station's an exciting place, I think, because there's lots of activity, lots of movement. There would normally be people. It's pretty deserted today, but I've tried with the photographs that I've taken to find a selection of different settings. There are views where there's lots of perspective, looking along the tracks, receding into the distance, maybe even to a tunnel, looking out to the light. And there are other views where you're looking really into these amazing dark spaces, and often these spaces are punctuated, structured by some of the really fabulous architecture, I suppose the Victorian architecture of these painted columns. Some of them even have sort of gold floral patterns on them. Anyway, they create a terrific structure, and as you look off into the distance, you know, as I said, there's lots of opportunity to create perspective and structure and depth through the perspective that these either receding railway lines and platform edges create, or through the gradually reducing, in scale columns as they move off into the distance. Now, the photographs I've taken, and even what I'm filming now, there's often a bit of a distortion. The lenses on these phone cameras are prone to sort of what's the word? Distorting some of the perspective. So you might have a little bit of adjusting to make. But I thought, as well as talking about the overall kind of choice of working with perspective or light space, looking out to the light, or looking into dark spaces, I also thought it would be good just to quickly point out one or two of the really distinctive sort of features that you might get at a station. You get signs, lit signs with train times. We've obviously got the benches, which there may be some challenge for you in trying to put the figures that you've been drawing from Emmy and Sunny's poses to actually fit them into one of the settings that I'm providing with the photographs that I'm sending you. There'll be a bit of manipulation. I mean, for example, looking just straight across the platform here, I'd be interested in a composition a bit like this. The setting's fairly simple. We're looking straight across at benches, but it's quite nice to have the diagonal lines of the platform edge and the rail lines. So that's quite a nice simple setting where you could probably easily fit some of the seated and standing poses that you've had. And within that, of course, there are all these great sort of details of that looks like it's not going to move. I wanted to point out let's just go back. I wanted to point out the signs, the columns, the various I'm doing all sorts of silly things now. The various features, architectural and train related features. So that wasn't very helpful. Anyway, just a few minutes more. These painted columns, the platform numbers, the platform edge, and so on, and the archways. So there's lots of features which are very distinctly, identify this for a painter as a station setting. As well as those structural things to help the artist put together a composition. So that's probably enough. I'm now going to go back and put the sketches of the figures that I've made into a sketch of a setting to illustrate to you how you might proceed as well. So back in the comfort and warmth of my sitting room, I'm now going to show you how you might start to put together some of these elements of the setting of the railway station with the figures of the posing models that we had on Friday. So I have some drawings that I did from that model session of Emmy and Sunny, some in colour and some in black and white, and then I've just made a start on doing some drawings from the photographs I took down at the station. This one looking across to a far platform. There's one of these pillars and the platform number and a bench, so I can imagine maybe putting some seated figures and some standing figures in that one. This one might be more challenging because it's looking along the platform to the open air. I haven't actually put any seats in, but I'll see what I can do, demonstrate that to you. But first what I'll do is perhaps a third drawing of the platform setting. So I've got some white charcoal, some white cartridge paper, and I've covered it with a bit of charcoal because I think the rub away technique is quite a good way in to this subject. And I think I say that partly because it's a way of a drawing evolving, and it's also a good way of being approximate. And the particular image that I want to work with is looking along one of these platforms. There's a staircase on the side here, and then there are lots of girders coming across the top. There's a kind of opening where the light is, and then there's a platform. I'm sorry you can't actually see this image, but you'll see it emerge. So this is where the train line is, and that's where the platform is. And I suppose I'm hopeful that it's useful showing you this approach so that you can see that my perspective is going to sort of evolve as I work. And I'd mentioned when I was filming at the station, there's a certain amount of distortion in some of the phone cameras. So it may be that actually the photographs you work with that I send you still need you to make some adjustments for them really to work. So this view that I'm working with is across to a far platform, and then there's a view through heading south, I suppose, to Berwick. So under that sort of girder, there's a view out to the sky, and then the platform edge is very usefully white. So that's helpful to the artist to be able to delineate that, and with a bit of perspective that could get slightly wider as it comes near to me. And then there's also a platform edge on the other side. So there'll be some perspective challenges here, and what I'm really trying to show you here is how you can approach perspective gradually. So these lines of railway track as they go off into the distance converge. And it gets a bit more complicated here because this platform, for example, isn't a straight line, it's a curving line. So if you can find a way, or if you can adopt a way of working, a bit like I'm showing you here, where it's a little bit approximate. If I were to put figures on top of this, then perhaps it doesn't matter that every single section of those lines is absolutely precise, so long as behind the figures there's a sense of things receding into the distance, and their scale, their scale being consistent with that, things getting smaller as they're further away, and lines converging or getting closer together as they move off into the distance. So what would you be looking for in your choice of setting? You want somewhere for your figures to be, and you want some element of the station. It may be that my figures would be quite small in this scene, in which case I might, having put some figures into this setting, I might then decide, well, actually I don't need all of the edges, and I might crop it a bit. So I don't know yet. I'm going to discover that as I go along. But this is just to show you how I've constructed a reasonably convincing station setting onto which I can apply some of my figures. So what I would do, I think, with that is, when I spray it, I think I would spray it, but let me pause while I decide. So here are my figures, and that's my setting. Now it strikes me first, I don't have a lot of platform on which to stand these guys, and I would quite like to have some big figures. So one thing I could do is, with this particular drawing, keep their heads roughly at the same height, but not necessarily get to the feet of all of them, by which I mean I'm quite drawn to this figure being, because it's this vertical dark, I quite like the idea of it echoing this dark shape of the staircase and the platform side. So I did spray my drawing because I realised that actually this process that I'm demonstrating is going to involve adding and subtracting, putting the figures on, changing them. So I think it makes sense if I can keep my background a bit stable while I add and subtract. So I'm just going to stay in charcoal. So let's say he could be there. It's just a bit of a silhouette, and it'd be nice to have a figure that's facing the other way. So I'll try this one here, and I'll make her much bigger. Maybe here. So as I said, if I aim to have the heads on a similar level, but have this figure much bigger, I'm only going to get down to the top of her case. Might be something a bit like that. And some of the things that I've been suggesting when you were drawing, I should remember about posture, the position of the head. If I did get to feet, what would be the relative position of feet? Are there shadows and so on, which of course there aren't with this figure because she's got no feet. There we go. That's believable, I think. And then maybe because I've got these seated ones, I should try someone over here, but of course they'll be tiny, won't they? But let's do it anyway. Maybe that one of Emmy with the box. How tiny, you ask? And that's the thing I don't know. I think you've just got to try it. The thing is, if it's so tiny, I wonder if it's worth doing. No, it's not worth doing. A seated one isn't worth doing, but we could maybe get a standing pink one. That might be possible, something like that. Okay, so what do I conclude from this? These figures are working okay. I would now try a little bit of colour on them, I think. But I also conclude that I don't... Well, it would be okay as a composition, I think, to have all that station. But since I'm interested in people and figures, I might explore some other possibilities where I could get more people for my space. But let me put some colour into that first. Just to take this piece a little bit further. So let's see, I had some ideas about colours for Emmy. So the pinks. So I'm just going to put this straight on top of the charcoal. I could have sprayed it, but I don't mind the charcoal mixing a little bit here. And actually the light is behind you, isn't it? That's what we had in the sitting room. So putting some colour into these figures, letting it mix a bit with the charcoal. I think that works well. Putting on some light colours as well as dark colours. And of course, whilst working with the figures, it's also good to then start to work with the negative shape in the background. So, for example, light on here. Something for the platform. What colour is the platform? Would that do it? So that's suitcase. I can work a bit with the negative space, just to see how that figure begins to occupy its space. We didn't have any colours for Sunny, but I think he had some sort of archaeologist's hat on, and a little bit of colour. Into, where's this picture gone? To the face and hands. So I did him in black and white, so I might just have to get a bit more colour into him. And as I go on from that, or work out from that figure, again, it's the spaces in between, things we talked about. He could have a shadow. And then from him I can work out a bit further. What have we got here? Maybe some sort of greenery. And even a bit of sky. What colour is the sky? White in there. And then I might also be thinking a bit about some of the station signage. So platform 2 and platform 1's over here, and so on. So that's that one. Let me try something different, because that, as a composition, includes my figures. I didn't get quite as far as the pink the pink girl over the other side. But she's really tiny, so I'm not convinced by that. But let's look at another couple of possibilities and see. Maybe this one, just because I would quite like to try the seated figure, and maybe I should also show you my point about cropping. So we could put that figure with his newspaper, something a bit like this. Again, I've fixed this charcoal drawing of the station, so I can it's been sprayed, so I can smudge and add and subtract a bit. So he's also still pretty tiny, isn't he? He's a bit big for his bench. Let's try again. A little bit smaller. Okay, so that would be him. Not quite right, but anyway, let's try some other figures. Anybody, who have I not done? Let's try her. So I'd like her to be really big, and also I've shown the other side of the platform there. I'd be very tempted to put a really big figure here. So I'm going to put this one on the platform side here. She might come to about there. And I'm remembering those things about perspective, the angle of the suitcase. We're standing there. It's maybe not ideal that her head ends up there, but once I've put some colour on, that could be all right. Then I quite like the idea of this figure here could be on our side. So she could be very large, and provided I don't give the impression that she's standing on the train track, which you know is illegal, I might be able to convey the fact that she's on our side of the station. There we go. So, I mean, this is, I don't know if this seems to be a clumsy demonstration, but you can tell my uncertainty, but I would like you to see that actually you've just got to persevere a bit, and if things seem not to work, then you change them, but you've got to give them a go first, really. And it's doing things like working loosely in the charcoal, trying out some different proportions, small figure in the distance, middle size, large figure. So trying out different sizes of figures in a loose way, and then maybe putting a little bit of negative shape, a bit of background colour on, and working a bit between your loose charcoal drawing and maybe adding a bit of colour to get these figures to begin to materialise. And once you see their effect, I would predict in many cases you'll be able to tell, can these figures work together? And you'll be able to judge, right, what's needed to make them work together. Does their size need to change a bit? Do you need to adjust them in some way to fit with each other. And the other thing, of course, is the whole sort of rhythm of the composition. We talked a little bit about that with the musicians. I'm quite keen on this arrangement, actually, these three of differing sizes, and I think it also gives me a chance to do something with the station architecture. Got that fantastic green on these pillars, and also again the station signage, the platform numbers and things. So that is as far as I might be able to go with these, as a way of showing you. Let's get some different clothing. How you might put together some figures and construct, maybe in pastel and charcoal, some figure compositions in the station setting. And from that you might then want to paint. So I'm not going to go as far as painting in this demonstration, but if I were to, I would start with possibly a sort of wipe away start, a little, as I did with the rub away drawing, a bit of thinnish paint, mid-tone, just to get something of the setting constructed, and then into that thin monotone ground I would put some darker figures and then gradually introduce the colour, so that the things that I've tried to make useful suggestions about, things to do with perspective, architecture, they can be begun in an approximate way. And as I was saying, a lot of these lines to do with the perspective or the architecture of the station, they're going to gradually be hidden by my figures. And so whilst they need to work when they're examined, they can be refined gradually as the composition progresses. Okay, so hopefully when we meet on Monday, you might have some ideas of how you want to proceed in putting together these figures and the station setting. All right, see you then on Monday.